What's going on, family members? Here are some tools that are readily available on my reloading bench that I use to achieve accuracy. I have a set of calipers and I have what's called an overall length gauge. It has a drilled and tapped empty casing that fits my chamber. In this case, it's 6.5 Creedmoor. And then you will also take a unseated, no neck tension projectile and push into the opening of this tapped and drilled dummy cartridge, and it will allow you to have free movement of that projectile. So what you're going to do is remove the bolt from your rifle, make sure your rifle is in safe condition, place a projectile inside of the front end of this overall length gauge, and it will be stopped or backed by that push rod. Once you place it inside of your chamber, it will go into the chamber and then jam up against the lands in your barrel. Lands is where your rifling starts, just on the outside of your chamber before it enters your tube on your rifle. Once you find the jam or the lands of your rifle, allow this push rod to relax. And when it relaxes, you will lock it in place with this cotter key. Don't lock it immediately because this push rod is made of plastic and there can be some flexing which will yield false readings. Now at this point, you have established the lands and the projectile, because it isn't held in by neck tension in this dummy cartridge. It will remain inside of the chamber when you remove this tool. Turn the rifle butt side to the ground and the projectile should fall out. At this point, you want to take the projectile and put it inside of this device and it'll butt up against the push rod. You will then take your calipers, and the calipers will actually measure from the bottom end using a cutout in the gauge. It will measure from the bottom end to the very tip of the projectile, and it will yield a number. You will take that number and write it down. The importance behind documenting that number is so you can know how to start seating your bullet deeper to accommodate your chamber in its specific dimensions. So let's use an example of conventionally loaded bullets. Conventionally loaded bullets are loaded to SAMI specs or other governmental specs to accommodate various chambers that are out amongst the civilian population. They take into consideration the need to be able to feed these rounds from a magazine. So they're typically loaded from jam using a seating depth of about 40 to 60 thousandths away from that jam point, sometimes as far as 70 thousandths. This should allow a conventional round to be loaded in any chamber on the market, assuming you follow all the safety rules. In the world of precision shooting, the closer you get to the lands without running into pressure problems, the quicker your bullet gets through the chamber and into the rifling and stabilizes faster, and you will have more consistent accuracy downrange, which ultimately could lead to lower standard deviations and lower extreme spreads. Now, there's other things that go into low extreme spreads and low standard deviations, but seating depth is definitely one of the components. Also, the correct seating depth can also tighten up your groups without needing to manipulate your windage and elevation on your scope. Something as simple as finding the right powder, but also establishing the right seating depth can make your group shrink. So these are tools that are needed to utilize that. Here's something that I want to inform you of. Once you find where your lands are in your rifling and you hit jam, a rule of thumb is to start backing your seating depth down using a micrometer on a seating die in 5 to 10,000 increments until you get to about 20 to 30 thousandths from the lands. That's generally where you see most precision shooters start. No more than 30 thousandths jump from the lands. Unless you start to see pressure problems, then you can start to back off, and I've seen some go as far as like 35 to 40 thousandths. So it's all based on your chamber and your overall measurements of your system. Once you establish that, write that data down. So if you have a specific bullet that you're using from a specific manufacturer, a specific casing, powder, and primer, document all that information. You may get a 1/4 inch group at 100 yards with 10 rounds and single digit ES and single digit SD. And you can load 100, 200 projectiles with that formula, and it'll never change in your rifle as long as all things are right and you're caring for your rifle the right way. You could change something as simple as a bullet. And what I mean by bullet, it can be the same manufacturer. You can go from 140 grain bullet to 130 grain, which changes the dimensions of your round. That changes those measurements, and you can see your group open up. Something as simple as that. So this isn't a one size fit all. Any change you make can affect what happens in your next shot selection. So be mindful of that. If you're going to go from one bullet diameter or one bullet manufacturer to another, this system has to be repeated, and you need to document that. So these are some tips that I like to share that I have learned through trial and error. An overall length gauge is something you definitely need on your reloading bench, and you will see the fruits of your labor. So as always, get into the comments if you have any questions or suggestions. I'm open for learning. And also like, subscribe, and share. Stay safe, get out there and train, and shoot straight.